So good evening, everyone. My name is Maurya Hanspal, and in this session, we're going to talk about reading and understanding the annual report of the company in detail. And these are some of the past few intensive sessions which I have been keeping on reading and understanding the annual report in detail. So let me give you a brief of what we exactly did in the previous session. So in the previous session, we talked about the basics of the annual reports. In the previous 16 to 17 sessions I'm talking about, and that were completely based on the annual report only. I talked about the profit and loss statement or the income statement in detail. I talked about the balance sheet and the position statement in detail. I talked about the cash flow statement, which shows the performance of a company. I talked about the statement to equities. And apart from that, we also discussed about the MDA, that is the management discussion and analysis report, and various other things, like starting from talking about the CSR activities to segment wise sales of the company and talking about the auditor's report as well. And one of the most important things in the annual report is to read and understand the auditor's report of the company. That what exactly the auditors of the company are telling about the company. And in that case, we had four kinds of auditors report. One was the qualified auditors report, then the unqualified auditors report, then the adverse opinion and disclaimer. So all these things we have discussed in the previous session, and we started with the discussion on the notes to accounts. And almost half of the notes to accounts have been completed. And each and every item in the notes to accounts we discussed in the previous session. And that is the continuation of the discussion on the notes to accounts. So all these things we have discussed in the past, talking about the different types of risk, your credit risk, interest rate risk, price risk, your foreign exchange risk. We also talked about the difference between the sensitivity analysis and scenario analysis. Right? In sensitivity analysis, what we were doing, we were just inputting one input at a time and getting the output. But in case of scenario analysis, we were putting multiple inputs at one time and getting one single output. So we talked about the difference between the sensitivity analysis, and all these things we have discussed in the previous session about the auditor's remuneration. We also talked about the difference between commitments and contingencies. Holding companies, all these things we have talked about in the previous session. And we had to start with the note number 46, that was the segment reporting. Okay, so let me explain you what exactly do we mean by segment reporting. Like for example, a company, like if we take the example of Nestle, which is into the fast moving consumer goods industries or the FMCG industry, Nestle is not like producing a single product. Nestle is producing wide variety of products, right? Nestle is producing milk. So like one segment is for the milk and nutrition. The other segment is for the prepared dishes and cooking aids. The other segment is for the powdered and liquid beverages. And the last segment is confectionery. So these are like some of the segments on which the Nestle is working upon. Okay. Similarly, like there can be other companies as well. Like for example, if we particularly talk about Tata Motors. Okay, so Tata Motors is again into different segments. Tata is working on the petrol vehicles, it is on CNG and LPG vehicles, on diesel vehicles, and especially on the EV vehicles. Further, in the electric vehicle segment, we have various other segments as well. You have the battery operated, your BEV, then you have the plugged in hybrid vehicles, your PHEV. Okay. So further in the EV segment also you have further sub-segments. So by segment reporting, we means that each and every segment of Nestle, that is how much revenue the milk production and nutrition segment is making, how much revenue, expenses, and profit and loss the prepared dishes and cooking aid is making, powdered and liquid beverages is making, and confectionery is making. So what exactly is the use of segment reporting? When we see the overall profitability of the company and gauged our results, that is whether the company has made the profitability or losses, we also need to see that which segment in the company is contributing towards the maximum profit and which segment is consuming that profit, that is taking away that profit due to increase in expenses or low demand. So that particular segment or some of the products in that segment can be thrown and discarded away. And all the manufacturing capabilities, expertise, knowledge, R&D, money, time, infrastructure can be focused on the productive segments, that is increasing the profitability of the company and minimizing the expenses. Of course, taking into consideration the future profitability of that product and segment. They have to do the segment analysis, they have to do the demand and supply analysis in the market, and everything they have to take into consideration. So that is where the segment reporting is beneficial. And where they have told us ki how much revenue they're getting from India and how much revenue they're getting from outside India. So this they have done as the information by geographies. That is, they have divided by geographies. Ki from India, from all these segments, the revenue is 126,427.7 something. And from outside India, they have like 6473.9. And again, the revenue has increased. So overall, the revenue has increased. So that is again a good indicator for the company. Okay. Still, overall, it has increased, but I would like prefer more because in the previous year, if it had been like 116,567, at least it should have been like 136 something. और यहाँ पे अगर 6384 है, it should have been something around like 6500 or like 6600. So like the gap should be more. So what would the companies be doing? The company would be trying to increase the gap. Okay. Then the disclosure under the Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises Act 2006. Like some of the schemes or like some of the suppliers might be from the MSC segment also. Okay. Or Nestle like might have given loans to the MSC segment also, the medium, small and enterprise. Okay. Like which are governed under the Act of 2006. So all these details of them have been mentioned in the question. So interest payment kuch hai nahi. It is just one item is there. You have the interest due thereon remaining unpaid. Ki itna amount is left unpaid. Okay. On the basis of the confirmation obtained from suppliers who have registered themselves under the Micro, Small, Medium Enterprise Development Act 2006, and based on the information available within the company, the following are the details. All these are details in which just one point is valid because you have the numbers for this point only. Okay. Then they have been talking about the first time adoption. In the previous few sessions, I explained you the difference between the operating lease and financial lease. So the leases like which are being shown on the balance sheet are the financial lease. Okay. So see, like now they have adopted the Indian accounting standards of like 116. The company has adopted the Indian accounting standards of 116. Okay, so what happened in the Indian accounting standards of 116? That later your IFRS was followed. Okay, IFRS something like 17, I remember. So in that case, like what happened, the leases were differentiated between the operating lease and financial lease. But what happened in case of the Indian accounting standard 116, all the leases were being classified as financial lease. So it increased the burden on the balance sheet, and like large amount of assets were transferred even from the operating lease to financial lease. Okay, so that difference you should know. All these leases, you're like right to use the asset is ultimately like your leases only. Okay, so these things must be understood to you. So they have given a comparison between 2019 and all. And these things were above in the statements also. So इस पे हम इतना work नहीं करेंगे. Then notes forming part of the financial statements. They've given about the equity reported in accordance with the Indian Accounting Standard C. Indian Accounting Standard 17. Okay. So earlier this Indian Accounting Standard 17 was followed. And the adjustments from the comprehensive income were being made in the equity segment. But जब ये AS 116 आया तो ये changes आ गए. Because obviously when all the leases are now being classified as the financial lease and there is no concept of operating lease, at least from the Indian accounting standards point of view, then the balance sheet of the company would be heavy then, right? Because all the leases are now classified as financial leases. So that one thing like you people should know. Effect on the statement of cash flow, because ultimately if the leases are being changed from the operating lease to financial lease, there would be changes in the cash flow statement also. Because like what happens in the operating lease में क्या होता है, the payments that you are making in the case of the operating lease, and what I told you in the case of the operating lease, the ownership does not pass to the lessee. Lessee से मतलब the person who is using that asset. So in that case, all the payment is being recognized in the operating activities of the cash flow statement. Cash outflow in the operating activities of the cash flow statement. But what happens in case of financial lease? The interest component which is paid, okay, interest component, like specifically the principal component, like which is paid, and the interest component, like both of them are like bifurcated, and some goes in the operating activities and the principal payment goes in the financing activities. Okay, so these things में थोड़ा बहुत change होगा, though इतनी adjustments you need to know, but at least when all the leases are being classified from the operating lease to financial lease, there must be some difference in accounting and all. All the changes like that were made, they have mentioned in here. When talking about the dividends, now the interim dividend they had paid of 135 per share for 2020. And 2019 they had paid like 101 per share. Then special interim dividend they had paid 180 per share. Then final dividend of 61.0 per share for 2019. All these things they are mentioning and they're comparing it with the previous year. इस साल इतना दिया, previous साल इतना दिया था. Previous साल एक special interim dividend they gave, like this साल they did not give. And dividend distribution tax they have mentioned. Then they have talked about the proposed final dividend. The board of directors have recommended a final dividend of 65 per equity share, and this is declared on face value, amounting to इतना dividend total दे रहे हैं. ठीक है. Then here they have mentioned to the board's report. Here they have mentioned about the code of governance. So they have talked about the corporate governance, that how did the corporate governance worked in the year December ended 31st, 2020. Okay, so there they have mentioned about the corporate. So basically, what exactly do we mean by corporate governance? So corporate governance is basically all the rules, regulations, or policies that the corporates are bound to follow. And if they're not following these rules, regulations, and policies, they are liable, like the government or any other authority is liable to take action on these companies. So that is basically, we call it as your corporate governance. Okay. They mentioned about the board of directors. Independent director, Asian Paints से हैं. And the names have been given here. Independent, like non-executive directors. So here they have mentioned about the names of the directors. This is their director identification number, your DIN. It's director identification number. Okay. कितनी board meetings हुई हैं, attendance, like whether they were present or not. Literally, they have given the attendance of these people. These people. Then ये भी जो 1, 2, 3, 4 जो यहाँ पे they have mentioned ना, these people 1, 2 यहाँ पे mention करा हुआ है, उनके बारे में they have mentioned. Like for example, if we talk about Mr. Suresh Narayan, reappointed as a managing director for another term for 5 years. So in सबकी like when they were appointed, how they were appointed, all these things have been mentioned. Suresh Narayan and all that. Okay. So we'll be continuing the rest of the topics in the next session only today. So I'll see you in the next session.